Welcome to Cross Border Conversations with two masterful coaches. My name's Siobhan Murphy, and my business is TheQuestConnection. I'm calling you from Long Island, New York, and I'm here with my colleague, Karen Kellaway.
Hello, I'm Karen Kellaway. My business is Kellaway Executive Coaching, and I'm calling from Halifax, Nova Scotia, Canada. And so today we're talking about a very exciting time for someone who's using a coach, onboarding coaching. And so onboarding coaching is for new hires. You're newly promoted. You could be within, or maybe you've come from outside the organization and you're starting in this new role. And so the question of why would I need a coach when I've just landed this job? So we're going to talk about that today. Of how would you use onboarding coaching services, what to expect, and I think that's where we'll start.
Yeah, and you have a beautiful model that has three main areas. Why don't you share that with us and we can go through the three?
Yeah, so I think when it looks like this, so when we usually start talking about expectations, there's a lot of anticipation, right? When we start a new job, but we need to talk about our expectations, and that tends to be business results. So what are the business results you're going to get for this organization? And so the coaches, our plan focuses on a broader way to achieve the results, which is to also focus on your relationships and to focus on your leadership behaviors and your results. And so you look at those sort of three circles, which we have up there in the graphic, and you create a coaching plan, an onboarding plan, which addresses all of those areas. So it's more thoughtful, I think, starting out to think about that and use your coach to create that plan. And so why don't you talk a bit about relationships? That's one of my favorite areas.
Well, a lot of times people want to get head down right into the work and don't take the time to foster some relationships with the people in their organization. So the first thing I have people do is identify the most important relationships. And that could be with their team, it could be with their manager if they're an individual contributor, could be with some peers, but to start to identify who to start with and to begin building those relationships, maybe by sharing some coffee, going to lunch with them, getting to know them on a personal level first, and then move into the kind of conversations about the working relationship that you want to create together. And you have some good thoughts about that, Karen.
So I usually give people a list of questions and we tweak those questions together so that you're being quite specific. So you're having coffee, yes, and you're trying to connect informally, but it's also thinking about if there was someone in the role before you, what worked before, what didn't work, and what success looked like for us working together. What do you like about your job? Even just having questions about why they're here and what motivates them, so that you can connect in that way. It's lovely when you can have a value of why you both join the company, because when you're working and aligning with your values, it's just going to feel much more meaningful. It's also important to talk about what happens if something goes off the rails, and how you need to bring that to your attention, so that if it does happen, and there's usually something that happens in those first 90 or 120 days, how you're going to agree to address conflict that comes up and any of those issues. And so even just having that conversation gets you on that more open, trusting place where you want to be.
Yeah,
The other thing, yeah.
Oh, go ahead.
No, go ahead. No, sorry, go ahead.
The way we're being while we're having those conversations starts to set the tone for the whole relationship. And it can be vulnerable to start having those conversations, but that creates more connection. I just was listening to a show on Sirius Radio, and they were talking about the power of vulnerability to create connection. And they had a quote from Oprah Winfrey about if she knew how much money she would make by having been vulnerable sooner, she would have done it much sooner than she eventually did.
So be vulnerable. It's hard to be vulnerable, though. So building that trust is really important. And so thinking about those relationships, and there's so much to do in those first, when you first get on a new role. There's so much in front of you. There's a lot of expectations, and so having the support of your coach and your manager to figure out where do you begin. And so another way of using your coach is after you create your plan, usually in 3 months, I'll meet with the person in the new role, the coachee, and their manager, and say, where are we on the plan? How are we doing? What do we need to course correct? And it's really useful to have your coach in that conversation because sometimes you get off track. You're just talking about business stuff, but we need to keep going back to how we're doing, whatever behaviors, how is that working? Who else needs to be brought in? And so having the coach help keep things on track. And if you're being vulnerable, it's nice to have someone there to support you if things aren't going as well. Um, Something that happens more often than it should is you get hired and maybe the role isn't quite as defined as you thought. And so having the role defined is really important. And so asking those questions, well, is this part of the role, or is this someone else's? And so because people shake things up when someone else gets hired based on other people's what they're good at, and that sometimes happens. And so going back to role clarification is really important.
Hmm. And you're talking about goals, and I usually help people try to identify an early win.
Mm.
And what we know about organizations is that when they first bring somebody on in a role, they actually lose money while the person is ramping up.
Mm.
And there's a time lag between the time the person's hired and the time they can actually make some contribution to the organization. So by being intentional and using a coach and coming up with a 30, 60, 90-day plan and identifying an early win, often with the manager or for CEOs with the board of directors, they can start making that contribution sooner to the organization than they might have without a coach. And that helps justify the investment in the coaching and helps everyone make a stronger contribution to the organization sooner.
The last part I think I'd address is fitting into the corporate culture, and that's when you can use the coach as well. Because there's always an undercurrent, there's unwritten rules in every organization. So going back to those conversations and who you need to talk to try to bring that out. And you talk about Marshall Gold's the 10. What's the book that?
But what got you here won't get you there.
Yes. Um, and we should put a list before we end this video of some of those behaviors to think about. And I use that. There's a handout I used from his book in my senior management workshops. And so sometimes we get hired because we're good at something, and that can sometimes become a strength overused, which is like, oh, who wants to that? But it's true. And so someone who's very gets things done and is very passionate, when they start a new job, sometimes that may be too much for the new company, the new corporate culture. So you could sort of look at what works for you and your strengths, but then where you need to either maybe dial it back or dial it up. And he's got a great list of things you can look at. It's just almost a checklist, which we can put up. I think I have 10 favorite ones to look at, just to think about, okay, I know I'm in a senior role or I'm in a leadership role, but maybe I need to think about where my behavior needs to be tweaked a little bit to fit into this company.
I can give you an example of that. I coached a woman who was really good at churning out the work, heads down, could get out work in great volume. And she was now in a leadership role with the team, and she was spending a lot of her time in meetings. And she was kind of exasperated that she couldn't get as much work out as she used to. And we had to redefine what her work was, because her work was meetings, both
Oh,
meetings with their staff, and meetings with the leadership team, and meetings with people in the particular role that she was working in. So a different skill set was required, and she needed to work through her people. They could be head down, but she couldn't necessarily. She had to be head up, head out.
well, that's common.
Looking around. Yeah,
Big picture time.
yeah.
Okay, we're going to wrap this, I think, and make it a bit shorter. So I think onboarding, it's exciting. I love onboarding new hires. It's just an exciting time for the company and for the individual. And there's just a lot of opportunity there within that first couple of months to keep things on track and get aligned. And so thank you for tuning in. Next time, perhaps, if you have ideas and other things you'd like us to talk about, send us a note. So goodbye from Canada.
And so long from New York.